Welcome to Raised on D&D podcast. Raised on D&D brings you inspirational interviews with tips and strategies to enrich your family's gaming experience. Your host for Raised on D&D has been a dungeon master for over 30 years and a father to 3 gamers. Here is Nick Cardarelli.
Welcome back, gamers. I'm your host, Nick Cardarelli, and this is Raised on D&D. My next guest is from Florida, and he's known for his work with Gary Gygax on his Yigsburg project. He creates content for old school games, predominantly original and first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Currently, he's working with Frog God Games, Hellebar Games, and doing an independent project called Guide Key, which allows companies to use the tabletop gaming experience as a team-building exercise. Please welcome Bill Silvey. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Nick. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for being on the show.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Now, Bill, we go way back to the HMGS days when they used to have their conventions in Tampa, Florida. Is that right?
Oof, the salad years, yeah.
Yes. Now that hotel wasn't the fanciest, but boy, did we have fun at those conventions.
We did have fun at those conventions, and as long as you stayed on the reservation, things were pretty copacetic, man. But that was a pretty sketch neighborhood, yeah.
Yeah, you don't want to be caught on Nebraska at night. That's for sure.
No,
everybody in Tampa can tell you that.
No.
Well, Bill, we've known each other for a long time, but I haven't heard your story. You are an avid old school gamer, and I'm curious, can you take us back to when you first started role-playing? How old were you? And can you remember what you started off with?
Yes, I can. I love telling this story, and if you don't stop me, I won't shut up about it. When we moved to Florida from Alabama in 1980, a group of schoolmates all played D&D. I had never heard of it. I think I have like a vague recollection of seeing it in passing in a toy store in the little town in Alabama we were from, but they just seemed to go gaga over it. And I asked one day I said, hey, can I see that book? Because one of them had this like comic book looking thing. And I distinctly remember it was a copy of A2, Secret of the Slaver's Stockade. And so I start looking through it and I was just like, I don't know what this is, but I want this. I want more of this. This is because it's not telling a story. It's saying when this happens, this will happen, you know? And so like all 10-year-olds in the 80s, when a pop culture thing came to light, I pestered my parents to the end of the world about it. And finally, one fine Saturday afternoon, we stopped by a local toy store because at that time, I mean, in the 80s, you know, selling Dungeons and Dragons in your hobby shop, toy store, department store, whatever, it was like printing money. I grabbed a copy of Keep on the Borderlands and a set of dice. And I think at that time, although it may have been later, but I believe at that time, I also bought a box of Grenadier miniatures. Now, if you're paying attention, you may note that I do not mention that I got a set of rules. I got a module and dice and got it home and feverishly started reading it. I didn't know there was a rule book. I just assumed everything you needed was in the module. Mm-hmm. And as it happens, I picked probably the best module to accidentally start playing D&D without any rules, because B2 has a pull-out section in the middle, the perforated pages, and they have attack matrices, they have spell lists, they have equipment costs, they have an armor class chart, and they have a saving throw table. And I intuited, just based on the table descriptions and everything, what most stuff did. Now, there were a few oddities. I was a rather generous DM. My first gaming group was my sister Beth and a guy from up the street from us about my age, Tommy. And I laid the module out, the module map. You know, you see pictures of people gaming with modules, and the DM is using like the trifold module cover, like as part of the DM screen. I laid that thing flat on the table and would say like, okay, guys, there's a pit right here. So be careful, walk around that pit. Here's a secret door over here you can find, and so on. But using just the scan information that was in the book, and I knew that I'd messed up a little bit because in B2, there's a brief mentioned by Gary on the subject of dividing treasure and gold and allocating XP. And it said on page such and such of the rule book. And I was like, okay. And I flipped back to that. I'm like, wait a minute, this is just like another area of the dungeon. Oh, I don't think I have what I need, but pressed on. And so for quite a while, we played Keep on the Borderlands, the game. And that was my D&D rulebook. That was my introduction to D&D. People are like, well, did you start with basic D&D or did you start with advanced D&D? And I say, I started with Keep on the Borderlands. Oh, so basic D&D. No. And the copy of B2, the loose copy of B2 that I bought, was actually keyed for Holmes Basic, which is let me back up. Holmes Dungeons and Dragons. See, when original D&D ended as the 3-book white box or wood green box set, and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was coming in 1977 with the Monster Manual, Gary tasked a gentleman by the name of J. Eric Holmes, who ran huge, very well-known games at I want to say it was UCLA. I'm not sure who contacted who first, but he said, hey, I want you to condense original D&D into a single volume, limit character development to 3 levels, and here's a few notes on it, and go. And so the first box sets of that, which of course everybody's seen, they've got the red dragon on the cover and the wizard and the archer going after him. But it wasn't labeled as basic or beginner or starter or anything like that. And B1 and B2 initially were written with that rule set in mind. But that rule set states if you want to run characters past 3rd level, go get Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It mentions AD&D classes and said, if you want to know more about these, go get Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So that module that I had, B2, although it built on the Holmes Dungeons and Dragons set, because it was for the Holmes Dungeons and Dragons set, really leaned more towards AD&D. So a year or 2 later, when I got really into AD&D, I had already kind of cut my teeth, as it were. So from there, I mean, I did get the Moldvay versions of Basic and Expert D&D also, just because they were cheap and available, and I would buy anything with the D&D name on it that wasn't bolted down. That's really how it all started. And
well, Bill, I love that you mentioned Keep on the Borderlands, because I actually didn't get an opportunity to play Keep on the Borderlands when I was younger. I was asked to run more traditional Dungeons and Dragons for a group of friends. And we were all at the beach, staying at a condo. I had purchased the PDF of Keep on the Borderlands, and there was another book that came out later. I want to say Return to the Keep of Borderlands. Yes, now I took those 2 modules. I just kind of took some of the more fluff out of the later one, and I went ahead and weaved it together. And really all I did was use the Keep as a setting, and some of the problems that the Keep was having, like the gnolls and the lizard men nearby, things like that. And I kind of took those as plot devices, and I ran the game. But it turned out to be one of the most fun afternoons that we'd ever played playing Dungeons and Dragons. I just fell in love with Keep on the Borderlands as an adult, and I ended up using that setting, I want to say a total of 3 times, with different groups of players, with different characters. They all handled it very different, and everyone had a great time. And I was surprised as a dungeon master, I was surprised how you can run the same module over and over again to different groups, always approach it differently, and it always seems fresh and new. So I really, really enjoyed that, and it really made Keep on the Borderlands one of my favorite old school adventure modules.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a phenomenal piece of work, and I mean it's one you keep that one in your quiver at all times, right? I mean I think it speaks volumes that when Wizards of the Coast allowed Goodman Games to go and start doing their super deluxe editions, the first one they dove in with was Keep on the Borderlands. You can get like 5 versions of Keep on the Borderlands. The one for Holmes for Holmes D&D, like I was mentioning, it comes with the one for Moldvay Basic. It comes with a 5th edition version, and then it's got because there were some art differences with the earlier versions, and there's some history from Luke Gygax in there. Yeah, it's a great product, and it's a great module. It is one of my favorites for many different reasons.
And fast forwarding a little bit, Bill, you're a father. How many children do you have?
I have 2 daughters.
And how old are they now?
My oldest is 17 and my youngest is 12.
So, Bill, we want to ask you, how old were the girls when you introduced them to tabletop role-playing games?
I'm not going to lie. They've gone their own way when it comes to role-playing and so on. My oldest for the longest time did some freeform Marvel role-play with friends. My youngest hasn't really gotten into it. She more likes fiddling around with the miniatures and so on, but a lot of the kids' intake is Minecraft and that sort of things. And I have extended the offer, of course. I always say, hey, if you want to play a little D&D, but so far they haven't been quite the tabletop junkies that I have. Now I will tell you though, one formative moment that it literally, like, if Norman Rockwell were alive today and doing modern family paintings like the vignettes of cute and adorable things as he was known for, I think this would have been one for him to capture. I had been playing, and I don't remember when this was. I think my youngest was 5 and my oldest was 11 or something like that. But they were both much younger than they are now. And I had set up a bunch of Dwarven Forge on the dining room table for a game that Friday evening, went to bed, slept in, got up, and I come down the hall and my wife is kind of waving for me to stop. Like she's peeking around the corner into the dining room. And I sort of lean around and there's my 2 kids are playing with the Dwarven Forge set and the little hard plastic My Little Pony miniatures, and having adventures and rolling the dice to certain results that, the whatever tables or rules that they had made up were made up on the spot and existed in their own heads. And I just listened to my older daughter, Charlotte, explain to Rosemary that, certain die rolls at that time meant certain things. And it was just, it was one of the most just, oh, my heart moments listening to them and watching them play, basically making up their own D&D right then and right there. I hope that they'll want to return to gaming someday, but I'm competing with a lot of stuff. I'm competing with mobile phones, an iPad, and 2 high-spec gaming computers that I built them. So I really kind of built my own trap.
Well, and that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that moment with us. What I love about that story is now there's a Tales of Equestria role-playing game. Now there's all kinds of games directed directly towards kids. Tales of Equestria lets you play My Little Pony characters in a Dungeons and Dragons-like setting. Now, the Dwarven Forge, for the folks who are listening at home who may not be familiar with it, 3-dimensional, colorful, beautiful resin terrain And Bill, I remember going to the conventions, and you had to bring in the dollies of
Yeah.
Dwarven Forge, and you'd set up the table, and it was just magnificent.
It hasn't gotten better, Nick. It's only gotten worse.
And by worse, you mean more.
By worse, I mean better. Yes.
And you can't help but have imagination spark when you have a three-dimensional dungeon on the table the way that you present it. So I'm not surprised at all that all those years ago, having that out on the table inspired the girls to make their own game, because that not only are the pieces themselves gorgeous, but the way you arrange it and the way you set it up, even adding like a fog of war with covering the rest of the dungeon. So the players are, as they explore, you're unveiling rooms. All of that is just what I think is that's your dungeon mastery. Not just the way you run the game and the way you manage the table, but the presentation. You know, they talk about in culinary, the presentation. And your presentation of your games is just magnificent, and I love it.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. What I have discovered over the years, like the very, very first time in 2004, when Greg Lukomsky pestered me into coming out. You know, I had 8 people, I think, play, and I played for my 4-hour slot. And then I said, well, I'm going to uncover this stuff, I guess, and show you guys, and because we're out of time. And they're like, no. Will you be here tomorrow morning? So, you know, I called the wife and said, hey, I'll be home, a few hours later than I thought I would. Tomorrow, I'm going to finish this game up. And people seemed to really enjoy it. And it went from 8 players at 1 4-hour session to 10 or 12 players at 2 4-hour sessions. And it just went on and on and on and on. And it got to the point when I ran, because I started creating adventures specifically to fit the amount of Dwarven Forge that I had, so I wouldn't be stuck going, crap, I can't build that. I don't have the pieces, with one exception. So I'll tell you about. So the second to the last, the penultimate adventure that I ran at Recon, and it was, I guess, 2 years later, I had 14 participants. We broke for dinner, and 14 other people came over and sat down and said, is this where Bill Silvey's game is? And I was like, yes, but who are... Well, we signed up for session 2. We've been waiting to play this. And I was like, everybody from the first group signed up for both. And I went out and I looked, and my card was full. My card was not full because every line was filled with signups. My card was full because every line of my signups was filled, and people had written in the margins, and people had written on the back, and people had stuck Post-it notes to it. I literally had to turn 14 people away and say, I'm sorry, I don't have enough. The point behind all that is not bragging. Well, it is a little bit, but since then, I've run D&D events, Gods and Monsters on International Drive in Orlando. They're an amazing store run by absolutely amazing folks. But I've run D&D events there, and they're in a touristy area. And when you've got people who have no command of the English language and are waiting for their bus to take them to Disney or back to the airport to fly back to Sao Paulo, and there's people almost literally drooling over the setups and, pantomiming, asking for to be allowed to look through a D&D book or pick up a mini or something like that. They played it and they liked it. And if you bring the special sauce, whether it's Dwarven Forge or just and miniatures or Battlenet and minis, or just you come and you put your heart and your soul into DMing a game, and you swing for the fence, you throw for the end zone, you shoot for the net from center court, every time people are going to know you're putting the effort into bringing them quality fun and entertainment, and they're going to enjoy it as much as you are. When you're laughing, they're laughing. When you're dropping an 11-die fireball on their characters and cringing as you add up that average 33 points of damage, they're going to be cringing, And it's not your creative writing experiment. It's the no shit. There I was. This guy's running Tomb of Horrors, right? And we're down to like the last two people, and one dude has gone through the teleport gate where it drops you naked in a Cesarak's tomb. So he's Starkers, and I'm out of spells, and we still managed to get out of. Those are the stories of characters that you want to create, whether you do it with Dwarven Forge and miniatures, a battle mat and minis, or just your good old imagination. And Carnival Barker, Vincent Price narrating a Hammer horror movie level of showmanship.
Absolutely. That's the real cut between an amazing dungeon master and somebody who is refereeing and interpreting rules at a table, is that you got to put all of you into it. And you are absolutely right. You're excited, you're getting up, you're nervous about the damage. They're going to be too. It's amazing what all a dungeon master has to put into a game. Now you're working with more game companies and putting out more material. Tell us what's going on with Frog God Games. What are you doing with them? Can you tell us?
Yes, I will be more than no. This is not top secret. Everything's out in the open.
Okay.
Sherman set the Wayback Machine to around 2004. I was online friends with Gary Gygax at that time. Gary was still with us. And he put out the Clarion for experienced gamers who would like to start working on a modernization and recreation of his World of Greyhawk materials for the then new, which, and I should mention that I also play tested Castles and Crusades RPG, which was really kind of the first old school game that did back. I mean, now you can't swing a dead cat without hitting somebody's reinterpretation of X version of D&D that's no longer made. But Castles and Crusades kind of took that tentative step towards reproducing an old school feel. And Gary worked with the Trolls on taking his Greyhawk materials and porting them into the Castles and Crusades world. Now, obviously, things like Greyhawk, Castle Greyhawk, the Flaness, and so on and et cetera, are all trademarked by Wizards of the Coast. They belong to WotC. He had a ton of material. He wanted to focus on Castle Zagig and let us write the world. And so we took sections of the environs of the city, all of us, and started working. And I took on we started out with 33 writers. By the end of it, we were down to 11, and I had 4 separate city modules and was working on a couple of other things. He also tapped me for some things for his Legendary Adventures game. But in the middle of that, he said, look, I've got one other project, fellows, that I want to work on. Frank Menser was supposed to, but things fell through with him. And it's called The Teeth of the Barkesh Nor, which if you've got your Dungeon Master's Guide for first edition, you have a first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, don't you, Nick?
Of course.
Good. If you've got that handy, if you look under Teeth of the Dalver Nar, the Teeth of the Barkesh Nor were the originals of those that Gary ran in his home Greyhawk campaign. And at the bottom of the Castle Greyhawk dungeons, there's this magical gate that you can go through and go on a quest to retrieve all 32 teeth. And the notes for it were just that, notes. And so I got a scan of these notes and I started fleshing out the world. Gary passed away after the manuscript was submitted. It was pending publication, and Gary passed away, unfortunately, and his wife, Gail, decided she wanted to go in a different direction with his published materials. It basically was left fallow. But last year, I was sitting back and I was looking at the manuscript because, hey, I kept a copy of my own work. I was looking at the manuscript and I said, wait a second. I wrote a whole dungeon adventure and plopped it down in the middle of Gary's Overland sandbox campaign. All I have to do is carefully excise this and suture off the ends of it, and I've got a saleable short adventure module. And I reached out to some friends, one of whom works for Frog God, Matt Finch over at Frog God. And I said, Matt, I think I've got a saleable product for you here, buddy. And so we put our heads together and decided that this would be doable. I wrote an essay for what became The Lost Crypt about essentially what I just told you, about getting to know Gary and taking this. You know, I wrote it up for them and it got put on Indiegogo. It did real well there. And you can get yourself a copy of an adventure meant for the world of Greyhawk, approved by Gary Gygax, not written by him, but approved by him. He looked over it and said, this is fine. This can go in there. So that's my first project with Frog God Games, but it's also my second project with Frog God Games. Around the same time, another gaming author and general author by the name of Lance Havermail, who is a swell guy. Lance started nattering me about writing an adventure for him. And I was like, dude, you want me to write for Necromancer? They make D20 shovelware. I don't write D20 third edition stuff. I write old school, brutal, you know, the 6-ton block slides out of the ceiling and turns your character to mist type stuff. And he, you know, that scene between Captain Mal and the pilot dude Wash, and, you know, well, fine, you do that then. Well, I will, kind of thing. So he said, look, just write an old school model and let me worry about making this into D20 stuff, but I won't change the lethality, or, you know, I'm not going to stick a saving throw in where there shouldn't be, obviously be a saving throw. So I wrote half of a mega module called Elemental Moon. And it's basically like a vertical Tomb of Horrors.
Wow.
And I published that under a pen name. You know, it went out there and it sat out there. I have no idea how it did on sales. I got paid a flat rate for it. I never read any reviews of it or heard any feedback. Nobody ever said, hey, this Andy Luke Crossness guy is the greatest thing since buttered bread, or, you know, this guy sucks and I hope we can find out who he is and burn his house down. So I just assumed that it, like a lot of D20 stuff released towards the end of third edition, it sort of went down, barely making a ripple. The guys at Frog God bought all of Necromancer Games and all of their IP. And I said to Lance, why don't we get together and write a third chapter? Because Lance wrote half of Elemental Moon. I wrote half of Elemental Moon. So why don't we write a third chapter? And since Frog God will do 5th edition and Swords and Wizardry, which is OD&D open source version, we'll have we'll write an old school adventure. And he was like, let's do that. So we're building from the end of the Sunken Tower. The end of that module starts off the third portion, which takes place on the moon. And it's bad. It's bad. Oh, it's bad. Oh, I've got some horrible stuff planned for that module, man. I got some Lovecraftian level stuff that you're going to be like, but I don't want to play my 14th level character in there. That's what I've got going on for Frog God, and they want to do a long-form version of The Lost Crypt also. They want to expand it out with more levels. They liked it that much, so I'm going to be working on that. Now, the other thing I've got going with Hellebard Games, that's Don McVitie's company, and I've had a long, fruitful relationship with Don professionally and hobby-wise. He's a great guy. I really like Don a lot. He's a good friend. He actually published recently the first adventure that I ran at Huracan, the Temple of the Sun. He adjusted it to fit in his game's over campaign world, and there were some non-OGL monsters that I put in there because I never thought of selling it, just creating a PDF that looked like an AD&D module and giving it away for free. But he said, yeah, I really want to use this, but we're going to have to change some stuff. And I said, that's just fine and dandy. You know, work with me on the changes. And so it's out there. That module is dual statted for Osric, which is the AD&D clone game, and for Castles and Crusades.
Okay.
And I'm working on some other projects with Don as well. A module that's going to kind of be like a fantasy version of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which I think is going to be. Yeah, it's like Apocalypse Now meets Dungeons and Dragons meets Hearts of Darkness. I'm going to have a lot of fun with it. And that, as far as writing, those are really the major big points.
Well, tell us about Guide Key, how that idea kind of came about.
Guide Key is, as you very succinctly put it, it is taking Dungeons and Dragons to the level of corporate team building and entertainment. Most companies now will fate their employees with, you know, family days, employee team building days. And I'm sure you've been at companies where you've gone to, you know, they get everybody in the giant meeting room, and, you know, you end up doing like the hokey pokey or something, and everybody has a laugh. The CE comes out and makes a couple cracks about golf, and your quarterly bonuses are announced, and you know, that's the fun day.
Yep.
Well, I was thinking back one day to, we went to a human resources thing. You know, it was, we were voluntold that we were going to go to this entirely voluntary event. It was a role-playing event at Human Resources, and this is like 20 years ago. And I ended up at a table with like one of the company CTOs and and like a guy from the telecom department, and they had each table. We basically drew cards out, and we had a role-playing scenario. Like, your card would say, you know, role play with the people at your table as if you're the boss and you got this situation. And everybody had a card like that, and you had a certain amount of time before a bell went off, you know, to create and resolve your situation. And I thought it was kind of cool. And I just sort of backfiled it like you do. And when I was talking to a longtime online buddy of mine, because he mentioned in passing something about, you know, employee days, you know, fun days for employees. I said, you know what you ought to do? You ought to throw me a couple of foul and fly me up to, you know, whatever HQ. Let me take over a conference room for an evening and find all the dorks in your team that like to play D&D. And I'll run an old school D&D game for them with Dwarven Forge, and, you know, I'll wear my nice black business suit, and I'll play Tomb of Horrors, and you know, it'll be a lot of yoinks. And I think, you know, I think it'll be great. And so he said, you know, I think that's a great idea, but here's how you should do it. So I built up this small LLC called Guide Key. I wanted to call it Guidon after the company that originally published war games written by Gary Gygax and Don Kay, but I thought that might be I thought that might be pushing it a bit much, because I mean, you know, Wizards of the Coast could step up and say, we own it all, baby. So I called it Guide Key. The service that Guide Key is offering is that your company has team building or morale building events, and having been inured in role-playing games, there is nothing more team building than having a limited amount of time to solve a certain number of puzzles. Situation, particularly if I run, like, White Plume Mountain is full of puzzles, Tomb of Horrors is full of puzzles, you know, Ghost Tower of Inverness. Those are all very puzzle heavy adventures, and I can come up with some of my own that require similar amounts of skullduggery. And it, you know, it's a great way to build a sense of teamwork. One of the things that I built this premise on, and you mentioned earlier, is that D&D right now is huge. It's huge. Kids want to play. Grown-ups who played when they were kids want to play again. You know, you can't turn around that you don't hit a major media outlet that is talking positively, finally, about Dungeons and Dragons. You know, it's not Tom Hanks having a nervous breakdown on top of the Twin Towers anymore. This is the game that they were playing on Stranger Things, the biggest media event on TV in a decade. This is the thing that they were playing on The Goldbergs. This is the thing that they were playing at the end of Freaks and Geeks. There's a Community episode that's built all around playing D&D, and so on and et cetera. And that's, one of the things I'm doing, because I know original, basic, and first edition advanced so well, as I'm playing those versions. Because again, when it comes back to it, it doesn't matter what edition you're playing. So they get those print on demand, and we sit down, we roll up some characters, and we play D&D, and people get a spirit of togetherness. Bob from accounting, who always seems to post up the payroll late on Friday when you just want to get the hell out and get to the lake, you know, suddenly you got to rely on Bob. Bob's got to rely on you. And then maybe, just maybe, you come out of that at the end with a mutual understanding because you had fun bonding together with those people over an imagined scenario.
And like you said, people who haven't experienced, they don't understand the level of camaraderie. Your whole point of team building is Bob from accounting is no longer Bob from accounting. Now he's Daryl, the ranger with the crossbow who saved us from the zombies in the warehouse. And that changes the mindset. And even though folks at home who are listening who haven't experienced this, we're not talking crazy here. We're not going off our rockers. We know Bob's still an accountant. And when we interact with him at work, we're going to call him Bob. We're not going to call him Daryl the ranger. But when we talk to Bob, in the back of our minds, we've had this shared experience. And when Bob's a little late on the payroll, we're a little more understanding. It's weird. I can't explain it. I'm not a psychologist, but that's how it works. Would you agree, Bill?
I would agree 100%, Nick. And I think you captured and encapsulated the essence of what Guide Key is all about right there in a nutshell. Well, my goal is at the end of 6 hours or 8 hours, or in the case of my current client, probably 12 sessions of 3 hours, is at the end of that, they're going to be going, you know, just like we said, hey, remember that time, you know, and suddenly these are not programmers from a foreign land, or he is not our boss in this country that we arrived at a year ago, and that's it. You know, I upload my code to the database and then I go home. This is a guy I can laugh with and relax with, and you know, maybe we start up a D&D game of our own here in the office and play during lunch hour or on weekends or something like that. And if that's the kind of a bridge that Guide Key can help build, and I believe that it is, then I think we're providing a really great service. I mean, you know, we're in a time when the world needs more unity and togetherness. Am I right?
Absolutely.
You know?
And so the work that you're doing, Bill, with Guide Key is it's making the world a better place.
Now, you talk a little bit about the history of D&D. I do want to mention to your listeners, you will find the recorded live streams that I've been doing. And in and amongst those, there's I've been doing a featurette there called D&D Antiques Roadshow, where I talk about the legacy of various D&D products and some of the war stories about their creation. So all you people out there in Radio Land, so if you want to catch me on Facebook.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you again for doing this for us and being on the show.
No problem, Nick. Thanks for having me.